So there are two main ways in and out of Holden Village during the summer season. One is by foot, and the other is by bus. Now, for those of you who have been to Holden, you know that it is really hard to get there. Holden is nestled far in the North Cascades, many miles from Lake Chelan. So you have to really want to get there if you visit. Some people who are feeling particularly industrious and fit will hike to Holden Village, but most people end up opting for the easier way. That easier way includes riding in a very old school bus up a very long, steep dirt road for 10 breathtaking miles. A sign hangs on one of those school buses. When you enter into the bus, you notice it if you're looking really carefully and closely. The sign reads, "The trip up is free. The trip down is costly." Several years ago, we were sitting behind a couple of backpackers who were making their way down the mountain. And one of the friends, the first friend, looked at the sign, and then he rather anxiously turned to his friend and said, "Do you have any money on you?" First friend then looked really, really worried because the second friend turned to him and said, "No, I don't have money. Why do we need money?" The first friend pointed at the sign and said, "Don't you see? We have to pay to get down the mountain." The second backpacker looked puzzled and then was quiet for a little while, and then he turned to his friend and said, "Stop worrying about the money. It's not about the money. There is some deeper meaning to that sign that we don't yet understand." So I wonder if that is how the disciples, this inner group of friends who accompanied Jesus up the mountain, I wonder if that is how they felt as they witnessed the transfiguration. In their terrified haze, they knew something really profound had happened on that mountain. They also knew that it would take the rest of their lives to unpack the deeper meaning behind what they had witnessed. The cost of that encounter would change all of us in ways that we could never calculate. Today is the feast day of the Transfiguration. It is the day when Jesus in his glory is revealed ever so briefly to his friends on this mountain. Each year, this mountaintop experience ends the season of Epiphany. Epiphany ends as it began, with God telling all who will listen that Jesus is God's beloved Son. But today's glory is visible for only an instant. Before his disciples can absorb what is happening, Jesus' face returns to the face they have always known. In their confused state, they wonder what this ominous sign might mean, what it says about the future that is to come. Now, all of the synoptic gospels have this story. We hear it every year at the end of Epiphany, and sometimes, if you are paying attention to the lectionary, we hear it in August too. Jesus takes his disciples, this inner group of friends, up a mountain to pray. And when they summit the mountain, all of a sudden Jesus is changed in this very inexplicable way. Then Moses and Elijah somehow make an appearance and talk to Jesus. Then this voice calls out from the cloud, and then immediately everything goes back to the way it was. And then, rather ominously, they are told as they hike down this mountain not to tell anyone about what they have seen, at least not yet. Now, even though we hear this story very, very regularly every year, there is always some new insight that is waiting to be found. And this year, what I find intriguing is the terror that Peter experiences. This is no ordinary fear. The Greek that underlies the text says that Peter and his friends are scared out of their minds. You know that feeling. It's that same kind of terror that when you see something makes your breath speed up really quickly. and makes your heart beat at a rate that if it's sustained at that pace, you wonder if you could survive. And then it's that same kind of fear that gives you that odd, queasy kind of feeling deep in your stomach. That's the kind of terror that I think Jesus and his friends felt as they witnessed this change on the mountain. That terror is understandable. Only a few days before Peter has confessed to Jesus that Jesus is the Messiah. But rather than acknowledging that, Jesus reacts to this in a very odd and unexpected way. He tells Peter that he will undergo suffering and rejection and then die. That's what it means to be the Messiah. And that's not really what Peter expects, so he rejects this crazy talk from Jesus. And then Jesus immediately turns around and rebukes him. But that's not all, because Jesus tells Peter and all of the followers of Jesus that they need to be ready. We too will have our own crosses to bear, and we too will share in this fate of Jesus. If Peter had any lingering doubts about this story, those doubts are burned away in a flash on the mountain. Not only is Jesus' glory revealed, but so too is the truth of what Jesus has been trying to say to all of his friends and to all of us. The Transfiguration confirmed what Peter feared was true. There could be no resurrection without a cross. There could be no new life without a cross. I think that there might be another reason why Peter is terrified. The voice that booms from this cloud. When that voice booms, God affirms Jesus as God's beloved Son. But that belovedness is not only Jesus's to bear. The Transfiguration affirmed Jesus's inherent goodness, and it also affirmed the inherent goodness in all of humanity. For Peter to understand what he has witnessed on this mountain, he must also come to accept and know his own inherent goodness. And only then will all of these events on the mountain and on Calvary and on Easter Day, only then will these events start to make sense. That idea is as scary then as it was now. Accepting the inherent goodness in ourselves and in one another is really, really difficult work. It sounds a whole lot easier than it is to practice. When I was in 5th grade, one day a new student arrived at school. The teacher decided that we should sit next to each other since we were both very new in this community. And this new girl would stay next to me the rest of the year until her family decided it was time to move on. Now, Annette and I got to know each other pretty quickly since we were so close to each other. She was kind and quiet, and we worked really well together on projects. Somehow we made a connection with each other so that when one of us was feeling down, the other one knew how to pick us up. After Annette had been there for a little while, I noticed one day at recess that she was off by herself. And then I noticed that that continued for many days after. And then I wondered if anyone had befriended her. I wondered if she had any friends. And it was at that point that I decided it was time to change. I wanted to become her friend, but I needed to do something first. So that night I went home and I asked my mom if it would be okay for Annette and I to be friends. Annette was Black, and she was the first Black person who I had known with any kind of closeness. I wanted to accept her as she was, but I did not know how to do that. I asked my mom for permission, not because I thought I needed it, but because I needed her to affirm what I had decided. I needed to hear her say to me that it was okay to be and to do something that was different. Increasingly, the world tells us that all the wrong things matter. The color of our skin, our gender identity, our affiliations like our politics and our religion. Those are characteristics that we know about each other at face value, and they help us to understand a little bit about ourselves and about each other. But they also often are used to divide each other and to judge each other. Those labels say nothing about who we are in relation to God. Belovedness in God's eyes has nothing to do with our ethnicity or our identity or who we vote for. That belovedness has everything to do with the inherent goodness that is in each of us. And it has everything to do with that inherent goodness and glory that is revealed on the mountain when Jesus is changed. The world tries really hard to undermine that truth. The world tries really hard to sever our connections with God. But thankfully, God has other ideas. Thankfully, God accepts us as we are. And that is enough. For the last several weeks, one particular Taizé chant has haunted my thoughts. I most often associate this chant with prayers that Jesus must have offered to God as he was on the cross on Good Friday. Stay with me. Remain with me. Watch and pray. I wonder how those words give voice to my own pleadings and to many of our pleadings to God. Stick around long enough, please, so that you will sweep all of us up into this inherent goodness that you know is what you have made us to be. But we humans are not the only ones who cry out. I think God cries out too. And I think when we hear that voice from the cloud on the mountaintop, I think it is God also issuing a plea to us. Promise me, God begs, that you will stick around to the end. Promise me that you will be here no matter what. Promise me that you know how very, very much I love you and will always love you. Eventually, we must each make our journey down that mountain. That trip will be costly, and it will demand everything that we can give to it and so much more. And that trip will change us. But today, let us give thanks for this glory that is revealed in God and for the belovedness that is affirmed in Jesus and in each one of us. Amen.